I'm just Donald Harvey.
Yeah.
I haven't changed a bit. I have been rehabilitated. I'm ready to go back to the streets.
Will Donald Harvey have nightmares?
No, because I have put it to rest. I've had months and years to live with it.
In the unforgiving world of prisons, the fate of most serial killers follows a chilling pattern. From mysterious and unexplained deaths in their cells to violent ends at the hands of fellow inmates, the story of Leroy Martin and Charles Schmid stand as haunting reminders of the grim fate that awaits the most notorious killers.
Donald Harvey killed in and out of hospitals. He was the most prolific serial killer in American history.
The finality of their downfall occurring within the very institutions meant to contain them. Join us as we take you through haunting stories of dangerous killers who met their end in prison. Donald Harvey. Entrusted to care for the sick and weak, he became their angel of death. Donald Harvey was known as the Angel of Death, a serial killer responsible for the deaths of numerous patients during his time as a hospital orderly. Harvey's killing career began in 1970 when he was just 18 years old and working at Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky. Initially, he claimed his actions were acts of mercy, meant to end the suffering of terminally ill patients. However, it soon became apparent that his motivations were far more sinister. Over the next 17 years, Harvey would work at various hospitals and nursing homes, leaving a trail of death in his wake. Harvey's methods of killing were varied and chilling. He used a range of poisons, including arsenic, cyanide, and insulin, to end his victims. He also suffocated patients in his care, tampered with their oxygen tanks, and even used a plastic bag to smother some. His familiarity with hospital routines and access to patients allowed him to carry out his crimes with relative ease and little suspicion. One of the reasons Harvey managed to avoid detection for so long was the nature of his victims. Many were elderly or seriously ill, and their deaths were often attributed to natural causes. Harvey exploited this by carefully selecting those who were least likely to raise alarm. However, his compulsion to kill eventually led him to target patients who were not terminally ill, increasing the likelihood of suspicion. Harvey's reign of terror began to unravel in 1987 when he was working at the Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio. A patient named John Powell died unexpectedly after being admitted for a minor injury. An autopsy revealed cyanide poisoning, leading to a police investigation. Harvey was quickly identified as a suspect due to his proximity to the patient and his peculiar behavior. Under pressure, Harvey confessed to Powell's murder and soon began to disclose details of his other crimes. His initial confession included the murder of 33 patients, but as the investigation progressed, Harvey admitted to killing over 70 people. However, the true number of his victims remains unknown, with estimates ranging between 37 and 87. In 1987, Harvey was charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 24 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While serving his sentence at the Toledo Correctional Institution in Ohio, Harvey remained a notorious figure. He rarely spoke about his crimes and showed little remorse for his actions. His case continued to intrigue and horrify the public, with many struggling to comprehend how someone in a position of care could commit such atrocities. On March 28, 2017, Harvey's life came to a violent end in prison. He was found severely beaten in his cell and later died from his injuries. James Elliott, a fellow inmate, was charged with Harvey's murder. Elliott attacked Harvey in what was described as a brutal assault, striking him multiple times with a makeshift weapon. The circumstances surrounding Harvey's death remain somewhat unclear, with various theories suggesting it was an act of revenge, a way to gain notoriety, or simply a result of prison violence. Regardless of the motive, Harvey's death brought a grim end to the life of one of America's most prolific serial killers, Charles Schmid. What you are about to hear might not be easy for your ears to bear. A real-life horror story that begins with a man named Charles Schmid. Schmid was a short man who wore cowboy boots stuffed with newspapers and flattened cans to make himself appear taller. He also used lip balm and pancake makeup and created an artificial mole on his cheek, while also stretching his lower lip with a clothespin to make it resemble Elvis Presley's lips. Schmid, often referred to as the Pied Piper of Tucson, was a notorious American serial killer whose crimes shocked the nation in the 1960s. Looking back to the 8th of July, 1942, when Schmid was born in Tucson, Arizona, Schmid led a life marked by deceit, manipulation, and ultimately murder. In 1964, Schmid committed his first known murder. His victim was 15-year-old Eileen Rowe. In a disturbing turn of events, the young and unsuspecting Eileen Rowe became the target of a heinous plot hatched by the twisted mind of Schmid. It began with a chilling admission from Schmid's lips as he blurted out in the presence of his girlfriend and his friend John Saunders, "I want to kill a girl tonight." Fueled by this sinister intent, the trio set their sights on Rowe, a high school student living with her divorced mother. Schmid, who had previously been rejected by Rowe for casual sexual advances, saw her as the perfect victim. Under the guise of taking her to a party, he instructed his girlfriend, Mary French, to convince Rowe to accompany them to the desert. The unsuspecting Rowe agreed, only to face a nightmarish ordeal once they arrived. Schmid swiftly bound the teenager's arms behind her back as she pleaded, "Why are you doing this to me?" His chilling response revealed the depths of his sinister mind. "It's Mary French's idea. She hates you." What followed was a harrowing sequence of events, as Rowe's bathing costume was removed and she was subjected to a brutal assault. Schmid's accomplice, John Saunders, was unable to bring himself to the heinous act, but Schmid showed no such hesitation. He bludgeoned the helpless Rowe to death before burying her in a shallow grave. Several months after killing Eileen Rowe, Schmid met a 16-year-old girl named Gretchen Fritz at a local swimming pool. Gretchen's father was a wealthy and important doctor in Tucson, but Gretchen was an unruly child who had recently been kicked out of her private school due to her involvement in an attempted robbery. Schmid went to Gretchen's house and pretended to be a salesman to meet her. At first, the teenager seemed suspicious of him, but then agreed to buy his things. When Schmid told her the real reason he was there, Gretchen calmed down. The two started dating, but Gretchen was very possessive. She would get very upset if Schmid was around other girls or went to parties without her. Sometime later, Schmid told Gretchen that he had killed Eileen Rowe. He even showed her where Rowe's grave was. She had also stolen a diary from Schmid that had details about Rowe's murder and another boy's death, which she threatened to use against Schmid if he tried to break up with her. In August 1965, when Schmid tried to permanently end the relationship, Gretchen threatened him again. Afraid she would expose his crimes, Schmid strangled both Gretchen and her 13-year-old sister Wendy in his car. He then hid their bodies in the desert, just like he had done with Eileen Rowe. Despite his heinous actions, Schmid continued to live his life as if nothing had happened. However, the pressure of keeping his gruesome secrets began to take its toll. He confided in Richard Bruns, a close friend, about the murders. Terrified and unable to keep quiet, Bruns eventually went to the police. This decision marked the beginning of the end for Schmid. The investigation into Schmid's crimes led to his arrest in November 1965. During the trial, the gruesome details of his murders came to light. Schmid's nonchalant and even boastful demeanor in court shocked many. His former friends testified against him, revealing the true extent of his manipulative and sadistic nature. In 1966, Charles Schmid was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. But his sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment after the U.S. Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972. Life in prison did not reform Schmid. He continued to exhibit violent behavior and maintained his egotistical persona. His notoriety made him a target among fellow inmates who viewed him with a mixture of fear and contempt. Schmid's downfall in prison came in 1975 when he was involved in a violent altercation with 2 other inmates. During the attack, Schmid was repeatedly stabbed. Although he survived the initial assault, he succumbed to his injuries 10 days later, dying on March 30th, 1975. Jeffrey Dahmer. From a young age, Jeffrey Dahmer showed signs of strange behavior, but his gruesome acts as an adult shocked the world. Dahmer's criminal activities began in 1978 when he committed his first murder at the age of 18. His victim was Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker whom Dahmer lured to his house under the pretense of having a drink. Once there, Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a dumbbell and strangled him. He later dismembered the body and disposed of the remains. This was just the beginning of a series of heinous acts that would continue for over a decade. Dahmer's method of operation was chillingly consistent. He would usually meet his victims, often young men in bars or on the streets, and lure them back to his apartment with promises of money or alcohol. Once there, he would drug them, strangle them, and then engage in acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. He often kept body parts as souvenirs, including skulls and genitalia. Dahmer also took photographs of his victims at various stages of the murder process to relive the experience. One of the most disturbing aspects of Dahmer's crimes was his attempt to create a zombie out of his victims. He drilled holes into their skulls and injected hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains in a horrifying experiment to subdue them permanently. This grotesque practice demonstrated the extent of his depravity and detachment from humanity. Dahmer's reign of terror continued until July 22, 1991, when one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape into the streets and flagged down 2 police officers. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer approached 3 men with an offer of $100 to come to his apartment, pose for nude photographs, drink beer, and keep him company. One of the men, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards, agreed. Upon entering Dahmer's apartment, Edwards noticed a foul smell and several boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor, which Dahmer claimed he used for cleaning bricks. After some minor conversation, Dahmer asked Edwards to turn his head to look at his tropical fish. As Edwards did so, Dahmer placed a handcuff on his wrist. When Edwards asked what was happening, Dahmer unsuccessfully tried to cuff his other wrist. Dahmer then told Edwards to come to the bedroom to pose for nude pictures. Inside the bedroom, Edwards saw nude male posters on the wall and a videotape of The Exorcist 3 playing. He also noticed a blue 57-gallon drum in the corner, emitting a strong odor. Dahmer brandished a knife and said he intended to take nude pictures of Edwards. Trying to appease Dahmer, Edwards unbuttoned his shirt, saying he would allow him to take the pictures if he removed the handcuffs and put the knife away. Instead, Dahmer turned his attention to the TV. He began rocking back and forth and chanting before placing his head on Edwards' chest, listening to his heartbeat and saying he intended to eat his heart. Edwards continuously tried to prevent Dahmer from attacking him by repeating that he was Dahmer's friend and that he wouldn't run away. Edwards planned to either jump from a window or run through the unlocked front door at the first opportunity. He asked to use the bathroom and suggested they sit with a beer in the living room, where there was air conditioning. Dahmer agreed, and as they walked to the living room, Edwards noted Dahmer was not holding the handcuffs. Seizing his chance, Edwards punched Dahmer in the face, knocking him off balance, and ran out the front door. At 11:30 p.m. on July 22nd, Edwards flagged down 2 Milwaukee police officers, Robert Routh and Rolf Mueller, at the corner of North at 25th Street. Edwards had a handcuff attached to his wrist and explained that a freak had put it on him. When the officers' handcuff keys didn't fit, Edwards agreed to take them to the apartment where he had been held. At apartment 213, Dahmer invited the trio inside and acknowledged putting the handcuffs on Edwards, but didn't explain why. Edwards then told the officers that Dahmer had also brandished a large knife in the bedroom. Dahmer remained silent as one officer, Mueller, went to retrieve the key from Dahmer's bedside dresser. As Mueller entered the bedroom, Dahmer tried to follow him, but the second officer, Routh, told him to back off. In the bedroom, Mueller saw a large knife under the bed and an open drawer containing Polaroid pictures of human bodies in various stages of dismemberment. The pictures clearly showed they had been taken in the same apartment. Mueller took the photos to show his partner, saying, "These are for real." When Dahmer saw Mueller holding the Polaroids, he fought with the officers to resist arrest, but they quickly overpowered him, handcuffed him, and called for backup. Mueller then opened the refrigerator, revealing the freshly severed head of a black male on the bottom shelf. As Dahmer lay pinned on the floor, he muttered, "For what I did, I should be dead." A detailed search of Dahmer's apartment by the Milwaukee Police's Criminal Investigation Bureau uncovered a total of 4 severed heads in his kitchen. 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached, were found in Dahmer's bedroom in a closet. Investigators found blood drippings on a tray at the bottom of the refrigerator, along with 2 human hearts and a portion of arm muscle, each wrapped in plastic bags. In the freezer, they discovered a complete torso and a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom. Elsewhere in the apartment, investigators found 2 complete skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved male genitals, a mummified scalp, and 3 more dismembered torsos dissolving in an acid solution in the 57-gallon drum. In total, 74 Polaroid pictures documenting the dismemberment of Dahmer's victims were found. The chief medical examiner later commented on the scene, saying, "It was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene." Dahmer was arrested and later confessed to the murders of 17 young men and boys, detailing his gruesome acts with a chilling lack of emotion. His trial began in January 1992, and his defense team argued that he was insane, given the nature of his crimes. However, the prosecution countered that Dahmer knew exactly what he was doing and was fully aware of the wrongfulness of his actions. The jury agreed with the prosecution, and on February 15, 1992, Dahmer was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his heinous crimes, Dahmer became somewhat of a celebrity in prison, receiving numerous letters from fans and curiosity seekers. He was housed in the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. In prison, Dahmer reportedly found religion and was baptized by a minister. However, this did little to change his notoriety among the inmates. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer's life came to a violent end. He was assigned to work detail with 2 other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. During their work, Scarver, who was also serving a life sentence for murder, attacked Dahmer with a metal bar from the prison weight room. Scarver later stated that he was disgusted by Dahmer's crimes and that Dahmer had taunted the other inmates by shaping his food into body parts and pouring ketchup to simulate blood. Scarver bludgeoned Dahmer to death, and he died from severe head trauma. Anderson was also attacked and later died from his injuries. Leroy Martin, also known as the Gaffney Strangler, was a notorious American serial killer who terrorized the small town of Gaffney, South Carolina in the late 1960s. His gruesome crimes left a deep scar on the community, and his life ended violently while serving his prison sentence. Leroy Martin was born in 1937 in Gaffney, South Carolina. Not much is known about his early life, but it is said that he was a troubled individual from a young age. He had a history of minor criminal activities and was known to be a heavy drinker. His life took a dark turn when he began a killing spree that would shock the nation. Martin's spree began in 1967, targeting young women in his hometown. His method was brutal and terrifying. He would abduct his victims, sexually assault them, and then strangle them to death. His first known victim was Annie Lucille Dedman, a 32-year-old woman whose body was found on January 1968. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled with her clothes. Her husband, Roger Dedman, was arrested and convicted of her murder, and he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. 9 months later, the Gaffney Strangler struck again soon after, killing Nancy Carroll Paris, a 20-year-old woman. Her body was discovered similarly to Annie's, reinforcing the fear gripping the community. Martin's next 2 victims, Diane Bell and Virginia Carroll Hill, met the same horrific fate in February 1968. These murders were marked by a chilling consistency in the killer's methods, causing widespread panic and a massive police manhunt. The breakthrough in the case came in March 1968 when Martin called Bill Gibbons, then editor of the local newspaper, the Gaffney Ledger, and confessed to the murders. He provided details only the killer would know, including the location of one of his victims' bodies. He also confessed to the killing of Annie Lucille Dedman, making her husband innocent. This bold move led to his arrest on March 1, 1968. During the investigation, it became clear that Martin was seeking attention and notoriety, as he had taunted the police and the press throughout his crime spree. Leroy Martin's trial was swift and sensational. He was charged with the murders of Annie Mae Whitesides, Nancy Carroll Paris, Diane Bell, and Virginia Carroll Hill. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including his confessions and the details he had provided to the newspaper. In May 1969, Martin was found guilty of all charges and was sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment when South Carolina abolished the death penalty. While serving his life sentence at the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina, Martin remained a dangerous and volatile inmate. He was involved in several violent incidents and was known to have a confrontational attitude toward both prison staff and fellow inmates. His notoriety as a serial killer made him a target, and his life behind bars was marked by continuous tension. Leroy Martin's life ended violently on May 31, 1972, when he was attacked and killed by a fellow inmate named Kenneth Rumsey. The murder was brutal. Martin was stabbed multiple times with a homemade knife. The attack was said to be the result of a personal vendetta, but details remain unclear. Now it's time for our subscribers pick. The image here shows Dennis Rader, known as the BTK Killer, an American serial killer who terrorized Wichita, Kansas between 1974 and 1991. BTK stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, describing his modus operandi. Rader's killing spree involved 10 victims whom he stalked, attacked, and killed, often leaving taunting clues for the police and media. Rader was a seemingly ordinary family man and church president, making his crimes even more shocking when he was finally apprehended in 2005. His arrest came after he sent a floppy disk to the police, which they traced back to his church computer. Rader confessed to his crimes and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. While some argue that he should be brutally murdered in prison, BTK remains alive and not part of dangerous killers who met their brutal end in prison. Tell us, what do you think about this image? Thor Christiansen. He was many things, but most notably, he was a sadistic, necrophiliac serial killer. In the span of a few short years, Thor Christiansen embarked on a series of brutal killings that shocked the entire nation. His first known murder occurred on November 20th, 1976. The victim was 21-year-old Jacqueline Rook, a young woman who was last seen hitchhiking near Isla Vista, a community near the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her body was found shortly after, with gunshot wounds to the head. Christiansen's next known victim was 21-year-old Marianne Saris, who disappeared on January 18, 1977. Like Rook, she was also last seen hitchhiking in Isla Vista. Her body was discovered with similar gunshot wounds, suggesting a pattern in the killer's method. The third victim, Patricia Marie Laney, disappeared on March 19, 1977. She was also hitchhiking in Isla Vista when she was last seen. Her body was found with the same type of injuries as the previous victims. The pattern was clear. Christiansen was preying on young women who were hitchhiking, making the area a dangerous place for those who depended on this mode of travel. On July 11, 1979, Christiansen attempted to murder Lydia Preston, another hitchhiker. However, this time, his victim survived. Preston's survival and subsequent identification of Christiansen played a crucial role in his capture. She provided a detailed description of her attacker, which led to Christiansen's arrest. Let's take a step backward a little now. It's no news that many serial killers like Christiansen always had a bad childhood as an excuse for their inhuman actions. But Christiansen was a whole different story. Born on December 28, 1957, in Denmark, the future murderer moved to Solvang, California, with his family when he was 5 years old. Unlike many serial killers, Christiansen was from a peaceful and happy home. On the outside, his early life seemed ordinary, with no significant signs of the dark path he would later take. Christiansen was a good student until his junior year of high school when he began neglecting his schoolwork. He moved out of his parents' house, dropped out of school, and began working as a gas station attendant. During this time, Christiansen gained a great deal of weight, at one point weighing 275 pounds. And as he grew older, he began to show signs of a troubled mind. Following his arrest on July 22, 1979, Christiansen was linked to the murders through ballistic evidence. The gun used in the killings was traced back to him. Additionally, Christiansen's car matched the description given by surviving victim Lydia Preston, further cementing the case against him. During the trial, Christiansen's defense attempted to argue that he was not responsible for his actions due to mental illness. However, the overwhelming evidence against him, combined with the heinous nature of his crimes, led to a swift conviction. In 1980, Christiansen was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christiansen's time in prison was marked by a mixture of notoriety and the grim reality of life behind bars. He was housed at Folsom State Prison, one of California's most notorious correctional facilities. Known for its harsh conditions and violent atmosphere, Folsom was a stark contrast to the life Christiansen had known outside its walls. On March 30th, 1981, Christiansen's life came to a violent end. He was attacked by another inmate in the prison's exercise yard. The attack was sudden and brutal, leaving Christiansen mortally wounded. Despite the efforts of prison medical staff, he succumbed to his injuries shortly after the assault. The exact motive behind the attack remains unclear, though it is not uncommon for inmates convicted of particularly heinous crimes, such as those involving violence against women, to become targets within the prison system. Donald Leroy Evans. Here is another American serial killer who left a trail of fear and death across several states in the 1980s and early 1990s. Born on July 5, 1957, Evans had a troubled life marked by criminal behavior from an early age. Evans grew up in a turbulent environment. Reports suggest that his early years were marred by abuse and neglect, which may have contributed to his later actions. He dropped out of high school and began a life of petty crime, leading to several arrests for burglary, theft, and other minor offenses. These early brushes with the law, however, were only a prelude to the horrific crimes he would later commit. Evans claimed to have killed over 70 people across more than 20 states, though these claims have been widely disputed. Nonetheless, he was convicted of 3 murders, each of which was brutal and senseless. His first known victim was Ira Jean Smith, a homeless woman he assaulted and strangled in Mississippi in 1985. This marked the beginning of his deadly spree. One of his most notorious crimes was the abduction, assault, and murder of a 10-year-old girl named Beatrice Louise Ruth in Gulfport, Mississippi, 1991. Evans kidnapped Beatrice while she was riding her bicycle, took her to a remote location, and committed the heinous acts. He sexually assaulted her before strangling her and dumping her remains in a rural area. In his trial, the medical examiner testified that the girl was conscious and could feel pain throughout her day-long ordeal. Evans' capture was the result of meticulous police work and a bit of luck. He was arrested in 1991 after being pulled over for a routine traffic stop. The police officer who stopped him noticed that Evans fit the description of a suspect wanted for a series of assaults and murders. During interrogation, Evans initially denied any involvement, but he eventually confessed to the murder of Beatrice Louise Ruth and several other killings. Evans' confessions were both detailed and disturbing. He provided chilling accounts of his crimes, showing no remorse for his actions. His willingness to talk about his murders led investigators to believe that he might be responsible for many more deaths than he had initially admitted. Donald Leroy Evans was convicted of the murders of Ira Jean Smith and Beatrice Louise Ruth. He received the death penalty for the murder of Ruth and a life sentence for the murder of Smith. During his trial, Evans displayed bizarre behavior, often laughing inappropriately and making strange comments. His mental state became a topic of discussion, but he was deemed fit to stand trial. Evans was sentenced to death in Mississippi and sent to the Mississippi State Penitentiary, also known as Parchman Farm. The prison, notorious for its harsh conditions, became Evans' new home as he awaited execution. Despite the severity of his sentence, Evans continued to claim responsibility for numerous other murders, many of which were never substantiated by evidence. Evans' life came to a violent end on January 5, 1999, when he was attacked and killed by a fellow inmate named Jimmy Mack, who stabbed him multiple times. The attack occurred in the maximum security unit of the prison, where Evans had been held due to his notoriety and the nature of his crimes. Mack, who was serving a life sentence for a different murder, attacked Evans with a homemade shank. The reasons for the attack were never fully explained, but it was suspected that Evans' behavior and bragging about his crimes may have provoked other inmates. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.